friend and I both joined the Naval Reserve, and then we went on active duty 2 years after. And I served in the Navy, first of all, in boot camp down at Bainbridge, Maryland. And I can remember that distinctly because we were there December the 1st, and they shaved all our hair off and gave us these outfits to wear, and we nearly froze to death. Quite a few had gotten pneumonia. And then after boot camp in Bainbridge, I was sent out to Great Lakes, Illinois to a machinist repair school where I stayed for probably 3 months. And during that time, the first weekend I went with my buddies up to Milwaukee.
Oh yeah.
You know, I had to have a good time, but as we were going up there, I noticed a sign by a little green grass airstrip, and it said, get your student pilot's license for $50. So the next weekend I got my $50 up. I went there and I planked down the $50, and that's where I spent my time mostly, at the airfield, learning to fly.
Now, what did they teach you to fly on? Was it a little Cessna?
Yeah, J3, Piper J3.
Yeah.
They're nothing but a glorified kite, but they're so much fun to fly. And I put all my hours in out there. I met some wonderful people out there. In fact, I was what they consider a line boy, where you check the oil, you top off the tanks,
right,
and then you help them put the planes away in the evening. Well, I helped one fellow put a plane away one evening, and we were talking. He asked me where I was from, and I told him, and he asked how long I was going to be in the service. And when we get through, he took off, and that evening he called the airport and was talking to the airport manager and owner.
right.
And the owner said, after he hung up, do you know who that fellow was? I said, no. He said, it was a fellow you helped put the plane away tonight. And he asked how much I owed him, and I owed him $40. Well, flying time was $4 an hour. That was a wet plane at that time.
Wow.
So he said to give my $40 in credit to that fellow who I was talking with, which is me. So I got 10 hours of flying time. But then I was transferred on a repair ship in Norfolk, Virginia. I didn't like that at all. Norfolk is not the nicest place, but I did serve a little time as an MP, going along with a regular MP, and so I stayed there for about probably 3 or 4 months. Well, then after that, my dad passed away, and I wanted to be close to my mother and father. My mother in Massachusetts, so I applied for a swap, and I was transferred from Norfolk, Virginia, to New London, Connecticut, where I stayed there. I was on a patrol craft, and what we did with the patrol craft was sail from New London to Norfolk, and this was the time during the Cold War, 1952, 1954,
Right.
and we were intercepting Russian submarines that would come close to the shore. They were listening to, I guess they were spying, as there was typical of them,
Mm-hmm.
and we would intercept them and send them back out to sea if they were within the limit. I think it was 12 miles at the time. And I enjoyed that patrol craft service because we saw whales and porpoise, and
I'm sorry about that. We had a telephone interruption here, but we're back to the interview. Joseph, can you please tell me what your rank was when you were in the service?
Well, when I got out, I was a machinist mate, 2nd class, and that's about it. I never did anything famous, but as I say, I was a regular sailor, and did the things that sailors do.
Now, again, can you tell me where you served exactly from start? From basic training.
Yeah, well, Bainbridge, Maryland was my basic training. I was there. I think it was probably 7 weeks. I think they had us there. Then I went to Great Lakes, Illinois, to machinist mate school for 3 months, and incidentally, I graduated 4th in my class of 90, which I thought was pretty good, even though I was learning to fly at the same time. Hardly ever spent any time in school, but I just loved learning to fly at a local airport that offered a student license for $50. So you bet your life.
You can't beat that today. If you wanted to do that today, it'd be
a couple of $1,000s. Yeah, it would be, I know. But I enjoyed flying out there. Well, then I was transferred to a repair ship in Norfolk, Virginia. I was there for about 4 or 5 months in the optical repair lab. That was kind of a fun thing. We would repair gun sights, rangefinders, binoculars, and things like that in the lab, and we used pure alcohol to wash the lenses off. Well, of course, some of the smarter guys than me used to take some of that alcohol and cut it 3 times with orange juice and have a little, have a little drink.
Probably potent.
It was very potent, yeah. Yeah, we had it quite ourselves at the time. We'd from there, I was transferred to a patrol craft. After my dad passed away, I wanted to be close to my mother, so I put in for a swap to closer to Massachusetts, where I'm originally from. And I did get one on a patrol craft, and from there on we sailed up and down the Atlantic from Norfolk, Virginia to Key West, Florida. During the time of the Cold War, the Russian subs would come in close to our shores, and we tried to ward them off, and of course they were trying to learn our secrets. But I enjoyed the patrol craft. I had a lot of good times on the patrol craft. At the end of the Korean War, my CO gave me the okay to get an early discharge so I could go back home and go to college. So I got out probably 3 months early, in the middle of September, and then I went on to, I got married, had 3 children, and while I was with the 3 kids, I went to the University of Hartford, which was Hillier College at that time, and I went 11 nights and got my degree in engineering. And from there on, I worked for a machine tool builder in Berlin for about 3 years as a service manager. Did quite a bit of traveling, and after a couple of years of traveling, I just felt I have 3 kids and a wonderful wife at home, and what am I doing on the road? So I finally decided to get off the road and got a job with the Fafner Burning Company, and there I retired from there. 1989, I was a chief engineer of a manufacturing development group. We designed special machinery for the company, and when I retired, and I was 59 and a half, and I never looked back, because I just love the retirement now. And my wife and I were retired. I asked her if she'd like to retire about 9 months after, and boy, it didn't take her long to do it.
Yeah.
And then we traveled to Texas 14 to 15 years, and in the wintertime.
Oh, okay, so you lived the winters in Texas?
Yeah. And people said, why Texas? Why not Florida? Well, we found that the people from the Midwest are the most friendly people in this country.
Right.
And we enjoyed them. Well, then I lost my wife probably 11 years ago, Christmas Eve.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you. And so I've been taking care of the house here. We designed and built this house, moved here back in 1982. I think we finally ended up by moving here. And it's out here in the woods, and I share the woods with raccoons, squirrels, deer, you name it.
All right, I'm sure you have a lot of wildlife here.
I do have.
Secluded.
Yeah, I do have.
We'll talk a little more about that a little later on in the interview, but back to the military service, specifically in the Navy. Now, could you tell me, were you drafted or did you enlist?
No, I enlisted. When the Korean War started, my buddy and I decided that we couldn't get into the Air Force program, which had been closed down.
Okay.
And so we joined the Naval Reserve. First of all, we were in for about 1.5 years, and then when the Korean War got pretty hot and heavy, we decided to enlist and go on active duty. And I really didn't do anything famous. As I say, I went to school, went and served locally.
Now, what year was that you enlisted?
1950.
1950.
December of 1950.
Can you tell me where you were living at the time that you enlisted?
Yeah, I was living in Holliston, Massachusetts, and we had a little farm up there.
Okay.
And I went in December. I think I mentioned before. And the first thing they did in the Navy was to take all your clothes and shave your heads in December. Right. Man, we didn't like that. Quite a few of the fellows were admitted to the hospital with the flu and with pneummonia. But
was there a bug going around? Or
yeah, I think so.
It was cold, you said?
Of course, we came from there wasn't a lot of fellows came up from south. They were Alabama and Georgia, and they were the ones that were getting more sick. And they were interesting. They used to call me a Yank until one time they used to get back around 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock when we were back in barracks. They would start singing their different rebel songs, and one of the songs was the Battle Hymn of the Republic, but they only knew two verses of it. Right. And I knew it all the way through, so after one evening I got tired of them listing just the 2 verses. I went down, I sang the rest of the 2 verses for them. Yeah. And it was amusing because they kind of accepted me pretty well after they said, well, this Yank's not so bad after all. Yeah. Good rivalry in the service.
I'd imagine, definitely. Yeah. Even today, still years after that.
Oh, I'm sure.
It still exists.
They're still fighting the war.
Yeah,
the Civil War.
They haven't accepted it. But nonetheless, can you tell me why you joined?
Well, I had a sister who was a Navy nurse during the war, and a brother who was in the Pacific. And of course, they were away from home, and I, in a way, envied them because you see some of these war movies that they glorify war. Well, it really isn't that glorified. But I decided I wanted to do my bit for my country, and that's when my buddy and I decided we would join the Naval Reserve and then get into active duty, see if we could get some action. But unfortunately, I didn't. Neither did he. We both bummed around the United States.
Now, you said you originally wanted to join. Was it an Air Force?
The Army Air Force had a program at one time teaching to fly. I've always wanted to fly. I just enjoy it since I got my license. But when they cut that out, I was disappointed, and I didn't do much about it until my friend and I were talking about it. We were both in an apprentice school in Hopedale, Massachusetts, and we decided that this is the thing we wanted to do, was to get in the service and see some action, which we.
Now, why did you guys decide to pick the Navy?
That's a good question. My brother was Army, my sister was a Navy nurse, but I don't know. There's no one. I guess I have a distant relative who was in the Army, although I have one relative, Arthur Zanotti was his name. He was an Air Force pilot, a Marine pilot, and he was in Pearl Harbor when it was attacked.
Oh, wow.
And he managed to, he didn't ever get his plane off the ground, it was blown up, but they said that for about 7 hours in their pajamas, because it was early morning when they were attacked. He was manning a machine gun. It was pretty brutal, but he never spoke too much about it. But I kind of like the Navy. I love the water. In other words, my sign is Cancer, and I enjoy the water. I love sailing. I had done some of that myself, private sailing, and but I guess that's why I tended to be towards the Navy. I figured I'd have a clean shower every night and a nice safe place to sleep, whereas in the Army you take your chances, I guess, being out in the field.
It's hit or miss out in the field. Now, do you recall your first days in service?
Well, let's see, yes. The first days in Bainbridge, Maryland, boot camp, we had about 80 in our group, and it was diversified. We had a lot of fellows from down south, and in December it was kind of cool down in Bainbridge, Maryland, and there was one fellow that we called him Alabama, and he said, "Man, it's chillery up here," and instead of chillery.
Sure.
And but they were the ones felt it most. I didn't mind it that much, but I did catch. I think after about 3 weeks, I did catch the measles. Would you believe?
Oh, wow.
And I was in the hospital, laying on my back with the measles, listening to them wishing old Lang Syne. It was New Year's Eve when I was still in the hospital with the measles. And when I get out, I rejoined my group, but they had already done their KP with kitchen police duty, and so they put me in a group of fellows that were trying to teach a lot of the new recruits, teach them to write and read. A lot of them, believe it or not, going in the service at that time, did not read very well, and some of them could hardly write.
They were illiterate?
They were illiterate, yeah. They managed to get in because they could sign their name and so on.
Right.
But during that time, and so what they did was put me in a group to teach these kids, the young fellows, and I enjoyed that. So I did that for two weeks until I was sent to Great Lakes, Illinois. That's where I went for a machinist repair school.
Okay. Now, what did it feel like transitioning from being civilian to life in the Navy?
Well, my folks were they were disciplinarians. I loved them. They were the best parents you could have in the world. But I did learn discipline, and in the service, it was not difficult for me to conform to all the rules and regulations. I was kind of a sailor that behaved while I was in the service. In boot camp, especially, we had a lot of drilling, and we had one kid who persisted in keeping bologna in his locker, and of course, when we had an inspection, they'd find that, and as a result, at 4 o'clock in the morning, we'd get out on the grinder. Well, the grinder is a big place where we used to drill, big asphalt surface place. And 4 o'clock would be out there till about 6, and then come in at 6, clean up, and go to mess, and then go to the rest of the training. But it wasn't too bad. But most of us did pretty well. We did have one fellow who didn't wash, wasn't very clean at all. And I remember a group of the guys, and I was not included in this, but a group of the guys took this kid in, clothes and all, put him in the shower, and they gave him a yellow soap bath to clean him. He learned after that, though. Yeah. I never did get a tattoo, though. When I was in Great Lakes, some of the kids, guys went out and got tattoos, and I thought, yeah, I'm going to get one, but I never, I guess, either work up the nerve or get drunk enough to get a tattoo. I was too busy learning to fly at this private field.
Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit more about your boot camp or training experiences?
Yeah, the boot camp, as I say, came easy to me. We were disciplined. We had to do all the running, crawling, climbing over these barriers. We didn't have any of the things that the soldiers had to go through. We had crawling under barbed wire with machine guns firing over us. We didn't have that, but we did have rifle training. I was able to earn the marksman medal because back home when I was a kid on the farm, all the kids in the area had 22 rifles, and that's one of the things we were pretty good at shooting squirrels and rats and bottles and stuff.
So you had the marksman badge?
Yeah, I did.
Wow, that's an accomplishment. So you had a good shot then.
Yeah, I did.
Now, do you remember your instructors?
Yeah, one was by the name of Bonnie.
Bonnie?
Bonnie, B-O-N-N-E-Y. He was a machinist mate, first class. He had been up to chief and down to first class, up to chief and first class. I guess he used to get himself in trouble and he'd bounce back up and down. And then we had, when we were going to school and we're learning of the ropes and knots and so on, we had an old grizzled chief petty officer, and he used to say that the rope and tackle is not tackle, it's tackle. Tackle meaning the pulleys that they use, that's part of the rope and tackle that they use. But he said rope and tackle. I don't want to hear anybody call it tackle. Some of these fellows had their own whims. And we were showing movies, of course, on the dangers of consorting with girls and what we could catch, and the different diseases, and the photos were kind of gruesome. Yeah, some of them has been in the service. They know if they've had some of these so-called training films on how to protect yourself and having sex and so on like that. But they were graphic, and I think they were exaggerated just to scare the hell out of us. That's what it was.
Did they get the message across?
They sure did. Yeah.
I imagine. Now, how did you get through all the training? You said that you had a disciplined childhood, from your parents. I'm sure that helped. But was there, did you have any trouble getting through it?
No, not for me. When we're in boot camp, we're held in check pretty well down there. But then when we went to Great Lakes, Illinois, to school, then some of the guys just branched out, and they went to Milwaukee or Chicago. And the first trip to Milwaukee, I had a great time. I went to the USO Club in Milwaukee, and they had. I have to say the USO Club is a great organization. They provide a place for GIs to come and have a cup of coffee, meet girls, and do some crafts and so on. And while I was there, I had a chance to. I met a nice gal from Milwaukee, and but unfortunately, I was going with a gal from let's see, from Massachusetts, and I just felt as I didn't want to cheat on her. It didn't feel right. I had a very strong Catholic upbringing, and that was one of the disciplines that my folks taught me,
right,
to behave and to respect people, and I did. I was. I'm not sorry.
Yeah. Now, again, could you tell me which war or conflict that you served in?
Well, it was during the Korean War, the Korean conflict. They call it a conflict, but I was hoping I would see more action. I think that I still had the after effects of World War II. The World War II ended, and I just turned 16, so I had to wait, and I couldn't go in the service. I talked with my dad about it. He said, "No, you're going to finish school before you go in the service." And I graduated the next year, but then of course there was nothing much going on. And then of course a year later, when the Korean War started, and that's when we decided to get in. I just felt as though that I want to do something for my country. You know, I feel very strongly that all young men should go into the service at least 1 year. I think in any branch of the military or any branch that services our country, I'm very patriotic at that, and when I see these fellows burning our flags and so on, I say, don't do it in front of me, because I won't let it happen.
That's definitely very unpatriotic of them.
I know.
I know. American to do that.
They say they're making a statement. Well, they're making the wrong statement in front of me. I'm sure any GI that fought for this country, that served for their country, would feel the same way.
I'd imagine that's a direct insult.
It is.
Not only to soldiers, but to American. I mean, it's your
sure.
country.
Too many of these great guys died and sacrificed so much. You know, I think of the servicemen, what they had to put up with, and some of them suffered so greatly during the war, come back with missing limbs and mental problems too.
Absolutely, yeah. And war is definitely one of those.
It's not a glorious thing, no.
Definitely not. Now, can you tell me again where exactly you went?
Okay, from boot camp, which is Bainbridge, Maryland. I went to Great Lakes, Illinois, to the training center, and then from there to Norfolk, Virginia. The only time I was on a repair ship, the only time we went on maneuvers on the repair ship, I had a 20 millimeter gun turret position for GQ, General Quarters, and we used to go out, or we did go out, and they had a plane towing a target about 1.5 miles behind it, and of course we would have to try to shoot at the target.
That was your training?
That was our training, yeah. Yeah. We had twin 20s and 40 millimeters, and we had a 5-inch 38 cannon, which was just aft of where my gun position was. And for the first time we were out, we were firing at this target, and the 5-inch 38 let go. Well, it made such.
Did you strike the target?
No. Well, we shot the line, right, and dropped it, and the target fell in the sea.
Yeah.
But when they let this 5-inch 38 go, they were towing a target on the water, and when that thing let go, about 3 or 4 of these guys had never been there. You know, a turret that fired like that before. Well, that door, that gangway opened, they came flying out of there like it blew up, but then they were chased back in by the chief gunnery officer who was back there.
Right.
But yeah, the training was, that was kind of a fun thing, firing at these targets. But the pilot who's, of course, the pilots always come back and they say, "Hey, I had some bullet holes in my tail. You guys are shooting too close," which is a load of bull, because they were about 2 miles. The target was about a couple miles back.
They were towing a target that long?
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh yeah. Yeah. The target looked like a great big sock.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
now, do you remember arriving and what it was like to your different locations?
Yeah, when I was transferred from the patrol, transferred from Norfolk, Virginia to Norfolk, Virginia. It was it was in the summertime. And I think some of the first duties I had there was to work as a deck ape. Well, we call it deck apes, the guys that are working on the decks, scraping paint, painting, and things like that.
Deck ape?
Deck ape, that's they call them, deck apes. And then I think I was there for a week doing that, and then I went right into the optical repair shop. Optical, where they repaired the finders, range finders, gun sights, binoculars. And one of the funniest things that we did, we used to repair the gyroscopes, ship's gyroscopes.
Right.
And when they were finished, the clowns would put it back in the crate. Now, if you understand what a gyroscope is, you can move it in the line parallel to its axis.
Okay.
But if you try to turn it, it just doesn't want to turn. It's the nature of the beast. Well,
right.
These guys would put it back in the crate, but leave a couple of wires out, and then they would call the ship destroyer or whatever to come and get their gyro.
Right.
Well, the two guys would come to get it, and they'd have this gyro spinning up to top speed, put the cover on, and then of course the two decades would be coming in to get it, and they'd pick it up one on each end, like you do it. And as they would pick it up, fine, it worked okay. But then as they moved in line with the axis, they could do that okay. But as soon as they started to try to turn, it wouldn't turn. And the fellow in the front would say, "Come on back there, turn this thing." And the guy said, "I'm trying to turn, it won't turn." And we would, of course, this is a great joke because we knew what was happening, they didn't.
Struggling.
Yeah, they were struggling to turn it. Yeah, that was a great place, the optical repair. And of course, if our chief petty officer knew this, we would swipe a whole case of eggs sometimes, bring it up there. We'd boil them, and we all had jars. A bunch of them had 3 or 4 of us had these jars, and we got vinegar from the mess deck, and we'd make pickled eggs. And we made our own pickled eggs,
nice.
As well as using the torpedo juice or using the alcohol to have us make our drinks.
Season it a little bit.
Yeah, because when we were on duty, we had I think it was one duty weekend, one short weekend, and a long weekend, which means we had to stay aboard the ship duty weekend.
Right.
The short weekend was we could get off on Saturday morning, but then the long weekend we get off at Friday night and come back at Monday morning. And that's what so we had to have some amusement, and I soon fell into the way the old sailors that were there before I got there. They used to know all these tricks, and so I soon got to know them myself. And then when I was transferred from the ship in Norfolk, it was I think it was in December that I went to get my ship in the Boston Navy Yard, the patrol craft. It was in the Navy Yard.
That's where you got transferred to from Norfolk?
From Norfolk to Boston. Yeah. Well, our ship was in dry dock in Boston, and then it was stationed down in New London.
Okay.
So when we left there, we went through the Cape Cod Canal. It was a beautiful day, just like today, just a gorgeous day, and I enjoyed it.
What time of year was that?
That was in December.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the seas were calm now?
Yeah, but it was cold. Man, was it cold when I got transferred up there, yeah. And you know, when you go aboard ship, of course, being on a repair ship, there was about 550 men. On the patrol craft, there were only about 84 men and officers. It was a much smaller ship, and we had. When I got aboard the ship, of course, I was put into a division with a couple other guys. One was from Chicago. I think they called him Ski. He was a Polish fellow, and then there was another really skinny fellow from. I think he was from Virginia. And those are the two people that worked in the little repair shop on the ship that I was on. And one of the things that I made when we were down we're headed towards Key West for the first time. I thought, man, I'd like to have a spear, one of these, to spear some fish, because I thought I'd do some scuba diving, or not scuba, snorkeling. And so I got some of this bungee cord and made myself a spear, and I had it in the vise. And I had pulled the thing back, and I used it I think it was about a 1/4-inch diameter steel rod about 3 feet long as a spear.
Right.
Pulled it back, and the Ski wanted to know how it works. I said, well, let's see. And so we aimed it at the bulkhead right next to us and let it go. Man, that thing put a dent in about 1/2 inch deep. And the chief petty officer on the other side, boy, he come flying around. He said, what the hell are you guys doing? And we showed we were making the spear gun. Well, I never did get to use it, but I did a lot of snorkeling while I was out in Key West. Had a chance to do that.
That's great. Now, when he dropped it, did it drop into, was it a wooden deck or?
No, the bulkhead's steel. I think they're about a quarter-inch steel. The bulk is the wall.
Okay.
And when it hit that wall, it made it put that dent in the steel, went in a ½ inch or so. And that's when the chief was on the other side of it.
He probably wasn't too happy.
Good thing it didn't go through.
Can you tell me a little bit more about your job assignment?
Yes. When I was on the repair ship, I used to do work. I had a milling machine, a lathe, a drill press, and what they call a pantograph machine. And pantograph is a device where you put letters in, and it's a device that will follow. Has two arms. One arm will follow the letters, and the other arm has a little milling head, or like a drilling head on it. And you would have you'd be making nameplates.
Okay.
And so you put down USS Norfolk or something. You put those in the plates, and then you'd inscribe that on a little brass plate, and we would attach that to either the gyro or the gun rangefinders or the binoculars. It was a way of permanently labeling them. Well, at that time, we had one of our ship, the AR-13, and I had more fellas bringing in their Zippo lighters. I don't know if you have Zippo lighters.
To customize it?
Yeah, to customize. They put the name on one side, put the ship on the other. I think I spent more time doing that than I did more than the ship's worth. But I would make parts for the broken rangefinders and gun sights on my machines. I did serve my time as a tool maker before I went in the service, and that's why they chose me for machines. I was able to set up my own machines and make little parts, and that's what I did. That I enjoyed, because it was kind of in the line of work that I had done before I went in the service as a tool maker.
Right. So they placed you in a job that was related to
what I had done. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. Usually they would, like, if you say you're a baker, they'll send you as a truck driver or something like that. You know, just the opposite.
Well, it sounds like it was a specialty to run those machines, because they're not easy. They have to be really precise with those.
Yeah. Well, I was a grad tool maker, journeyman tool maker it was called. I served 44,000 hours before I went in, 2.5 years. So I enjoyed that. Many times the offices would bring in parts of a car or something like that they would like to have repaired, and I could either weld them or braze them or remachine them so they could use them. And I did more favors for the guy for their own personal things, I swear. And cigarette lighters, Zippo cigarette lighters. I still have mine too, by the way.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Now you were in the Atlantic, and it was during a conflict. Did you ever have any interaction with the enemy at all over there, or any direct combat or anybody
over here on the Atlantic? Yeah, there were twice that we intercepted Russian there was like Russian destroyers, I believe, at two separate times. And upon this ship, we had a lot of sonar, and we could hear submarines.
Russian subs?
Russian subs that were coming in. And you can tell the difference between the Russian and American subs. These guys on sonar were pretty clever. And they report to the officer in charge that they're Russian subs. They hear the pinging of them. And so we would circle above them and send messages to them if they're in our waters to get back out to the ocean again.
Did they ever respond back?
I think only one time they apologized. From what I understand,
Really?
They apologized. So sorry, and they were heading. And we knew we could tell that when they turned and went back out to sea again. But the Cold War, if anyone lived during that time, was a pretty intense time, whereby anything could trigger another war, because Russia was very suspicious of us, and we were suspicious of the Russians too. I think we still are, to tell the truth.
Now, did you see any casualties in your unit from training or any accidents?
As a matter of fact, I did one time. When I was stationed in Norfolk, Virginia, I was with my buddy at Newport News. And down there they were used to, the evening they had cables stretched across part of the bay. And they had at evenings a tractor would go over and hook up with these cables. They were anti-submarine cables, and pull them into big nets, and they would pull them into
the water or out in from the water?
Yeah. What they did in the morning, they would lay them down so the ships could pass over them.
Yeah.
And in the evenings, they would pull them back up so the subs couldn't get through.
So it's kind of a defensive barrier.
Exactly. And I do remember one time we were watching this fellow pulling it in with a tractor, and we heard a loud report, a real pow, and the cable snapped, and it took part of the head off of this fellow who was driving the tractor. That was a pretty gross thing. That's the worst thing I ever did see. It was a casualty that, when you think of it now, would never happen because they have all sorts of guards on these tractors, and behind them they wear headgear and they wear helmets and so on. But at that time they didn't, and that was the worst thing I ever saw.
He was decapitated from it?
Part of his head was taken off, and we went over to see if there was anything we could do to help, but there was nothing. He was dead. We just called for the ambulance to come and pick him up. But that was the worst thing I ever saw. Thank heaven, I think I wouldn't want to see anything worse than that.
That's
other than guys getting seasick every now and then, which I did one time. I had the forward engine room watch when we left on the patrol craft. We were going down through Cape Hatteras, and a hurricane was coming up, and we were warned to come in closer to shore.
Right.
And so we came in closer to shore, but the waves were horrendous, and everyone was off the flying bridge. That's the exposed bridge up on top.
Okay.
But I took a movie camera and I went up there because I wanted to see when our bow went down, it just disappeared in the water, and all of a sudden it would come right up. It was quite a thrilling thing.
This was on the smaller ship too,
on the
right?
smaller
84, so this thing was probably
it sure did bobble.
In water, huh?
Yeah, and I had the forward engine room watch at midnight, the mid-watch. And we had pork chops that night, and I got sick and I wanted to die. I was hoping that the water would come down the gangway and the ship would sink, and that would be the end of it.
Yeah.
And another good, if this lieutenant ever heard this now, one evening I had the forward engine room watch from 8 to 12, and I could smell apple pies being baked. And when you climb the gangway out of the forward engine room watch, it was at the mess, what we call the mess, where the guys ate.
Right.
And that's where they were showing a movie, and everyone was watching away from where I climbed out of I could see the backs of all these guys. They were watching the movie, and this lieutenant had baked a couple of apple pies, and that was right near the gangway also. And so I said, "Oh man, that looks good." So I grabbed one of those apple pies, and it was hot. I went down the forward engine room and waited to cool off, and I had some, and the mid-watch came down, and he had some.
Yeah.
And when I got up there, went up, I think it was at about 10:30 or 11 o'clock, the lights all went on, and there was a lot of yelling on up there. So I climbed the gangway and stuck my head up, and the lieutenant was yelling, "Who stole that pie? If I catch that guy, I kill." Just reminded me of, if you ever saw that movie, Mr. Roberts, people playing tricks on the officers. Well, he never found out who stole the pie, but I ate part of it, and I know I made sure that the guy threw the tin overboard. Don't make sure it doesn't show up in the forward engine room.
Was it a good pie though?
Oh yeah, it was.
Yeah.
The guy was a good cook. I could see why he was upset. But anyway, after all, he had the other one. He had to share it with the crew.
That's funny. That was a pretty memorable experience. Can you tell me, do you have any other memorable experiences from your time spent in the Navy?
Oh, probably on the patrol craft. We had an Indian from Oklahoma.
A Native
American, yeah.
Right.
He was a funny guy. He was a very quiet guy, kept to himself, and people would kind of pester him. They'd call him, hey chief, and he'd grunt back, I'm not a chief. He'd speak in good English, and but it was a good-natured pandering. He was quite a guy too, and typical Indian, had the ruddy features or so, but he was a great guy. And then I had another friend who was Mormon. He came from Salt Lake City, I guess it was. Utah, yeah.
Right.
But he was a great guy. He was one of my best friends in the service, on the patrol craft. We would go take out walks. He was a kind of a clean-cut kid, and I guess I kind of fell into that mold somewhat. Right. The only thing we did was go out together and have a pizza and probably have a beer and get back on the ship in time.
Right.
And then towards the end of the service on the patrol craft, before I got out, 3 or 4 months before, they decided to have let you get up whatever you want, get up in the morning, Sunday mornings, get up whatever time you wanted to, and you have brunch. You could have steak and eggs or whatever you had, whatever they had. And I guess they were trying to entice us to stay in because a lot of guys were just leaving at the service. And one of those things that they used to call S on a shingle. It's I loved that, and a lot of guys did like that. It's dry, I think, chipped beef with cream on toast.
Right.
They call it shit in a shingle. That's what they used to call it.
Okay.
But I kind of liked it. I thought it was good. I did like the steak and eggs on Sunday mornings, though.
That was so you get to sleep in and then have steak and eggs.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
Now, you were not prisoner of war, correct?
No. I guess some of those guys had it tough. Fortunately, I wasn't.
That's definitely a very good thing. Now, were you awarded any medals or citations while in your service?
No, the ship was awarded the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. I was awarded the Good Conduct Medal, and there was a Korean medal, Korean Service Medal that I was awarded. I can't think of the particular name for it, but I had those 3 ribbons. Unfortunately, they weren't considered a war zone ribbon, and I had tried to join the VFW right over here in Avon. There's a great bunch of guys over there, and they're patient with me, and the commander said, I don't have the qualifications. So I did serve 13 months on the ocean, 13 months of sea duty, but they didn't consider that as dangerous or in a war zone. And so I've been meeting with them, and I feel like a counterfeit VFW soldier, but I do go with them because they're a great bunch of guys. And the commander said, even if you don't have the qualifications, we want you to come. And so I do. I go to their meetings, and I enjoy the company. They're a great bunch of guys.
That's good. I'm sure you guys converse about a lot of different things.
Oh yeah, when I see these fellows with their ribbons and so on, I get kind of say, well, I wish I had gone to some of those zones too, but I went where the Navy sent me. That's all I can say.
Right. Now, how did you stay in touch with your family when you were
Well, that was interesting. When I was in boot camp, I think it was the USO provided us with a phone call to our homes for as long as we wanted, and I called my home in Massachusetts, talked to my dad and my mother, and my girlfriend at that time lived about 12 miles away, and my dad went and picked up my girlfriend so she could come back and talk with me, which I thought was a great sacrifice on his part. He drove up and got her. But they provided, the USO provided telephone service, and when we're at the USO places, they would also allow you to call home. I used to write home as well as call home. We had no computers at those times. Yeah, I used to write to my mom about once or twice a week or so, and I could call her because after my dad passed away, I tried to keep in touch with her. And I wrote to my girlfriend, who wrote me up practically every day. I would get letters on the ship or wherever I was. And so but the USO, as I say, I can't say enough about them. They provided the means of contacting them. When I was on the patrol craft, I had whacked my nose and I had trouble breathing, and so they sent me to Newport, Rhode Island, to the hospital. I was there for about 12 weeks, where they removed the deviated septum.
Okay.
And during that time, Bob Hope came, and I saw Bob Hope, Jerry Colonna, and Francis Langford, the whole cast.
They came up to the hospital?
They came up to the hospital, and they put on a show.
Was it a good entertainment?
Oh, yeah.
Entertainment?
Bob Hope is first class. He did an awful lot for the service, too. He just, I was very grateful that I was able to see him there.
That's quite the experience.
Yes, it sure was.
Definitely poured a lot. It's an honor to be able to see them. Now, could you tell me, you said you had steak and eggs and Sunday. It sounds pretty tasty, but what was the food like over there? Did they have good cooks? Did they have good quality food?
On the repair ship in the Amphi, on the big one, The food was okay. I will say it was kind of mediocre sometimes, but on the patrol craft we ate good. One of the things that we would do when we come into New London and dock, a truck would come up with commissary for us, canned goods, canned milk, and things like that. And these two cohorts of mine that had this little repair place where we worked, as we would pass food in, we made it a point to station one of the guys right near our compartment. And as they were passing food in, what you do is you form a human chain from the up the gangway, from the truck up the gangway to
kind of pass it along.
pass it along. And when we got to cases of tuna fish, we'd just chuck it right into our compartment. And I remember the lieutenant would, at the very end, would say, "You know, I thought we had more tuna fish than that. We're supposed to have more." No, we wouldn't say anything, but we enjoyed tuna fish and crackers as a snack later on. Oh yeah, we weren't the only ones who were doing that. I'm sure.
Now, did you guys have plenty of supplies aboard your ship?
Yeah, we did. On the patrol craft, we had fresh milk because a lot of times when we'd touch in, it'd take us about a week and a half to get to Key West, and then we'd get supplies down there and then come on back. But the food was good. I will say much better, and the cooks were good too. They, if you wanted something out of the ordinary, if they had it, they would do it. Like instead of just giving you plain pork chops, they bread them and a little seasoning, applesauce and stuff like that went with it.
That's good.
But the food was good.
It's important. Now, did you feel pressure or stress at all?
No, neither one. I think when I first went aboard the repair ship, I felt a little odd because we were, I did these scraping paint. I didn't enjoy that very much. And the bosun's mate that they had was an old first class. I guess he was another one that was bounced up and down through the ranks to third class, second class, first class, back down to third class. And he was rough on the guys, especially Yankees. He didn't like Yankees at all.
He was a Southerner guy?
He was a Southerner, yeah.
Where was he? Do you remember what state he was from?
I'm kind of think it was South Carolina.
Okay.
Yeah. He had a real twang with him, and he was not easy on us guys. And he's, "I'm going to make you guys work," in his southern accent. "I'll make you guys work," And but I kind of did what I had to do and stayed away. But the few would goof off, and he'd catch them goofing off, and you just had to look busy. Of course, at that time, to scrape paint, you had a scraper. You didn't have any of these electronic devices you have now, chippers or something like that. And but we had 1 week after I was there, I was a chief. He was a Kiplinger was his name, and he was one hell of a nice guy. He was a warrant officer, and warrant officers they're enlisted men that come up through the ranks. They make officers, but they're not really a so-called officer. They earn their keep by knowing what to do and being pretty intelligent. Warrant officers really earn their rank, and he was a great guy. I was saying this warrant officer, Kiplinger, when my dad passed away, he learned of it and knew that I wanted to get transferred. He immediately put in a swap for me to get to patrol craft up in New London. He was a great guy. But he put me in the repair shop, and because he knew that I had served my time as a toolmaker, and that's where I enjoyed the time, working for him in the repair shop, gun sights and so on.
Now, was there something special you did for good luck at all?
I can't think of, not really. I just enjoyed I kind of enjoyed the camaraderie with the sailors. They were an easy-going bunch, I find, and I like people first of all, and I like it's easy for me to get to meet people. You say, "Where you from, sailor?" and get to talking and get to meet people, and it's great.
Now, how do people entertain themselves? I remember you saying that the USO show, or the USO rather, entertained you with Bob Hope and Jerry Clone and so on. What else did you guys do for entertainment aboard the ship?
What we used to do on the patrol craft, we would get if we had roast beef or some tough meat, a tough steak, we would save a couple of pieces of it, and then get a long piece of string and tie the piece of meat on each end of the string. And then, of course, when we're traveling on the ocean with, we would always have seagulls following us. It's kind of a funny thing. We would take, I don't think the ASPCA would like this, we would take and walk up to the fantail, that's the rear of the ship, and off each side would drop the piece of meat that were attached by the string.
Yeah.
And of course the gulls were flying along behind them. They'd dive right for this, and 2 gulls would pick up each piece. Well, it was okay until the string got taut. Yeah. And then they would squawk and be fighting for it. And we amused ourselves by watching them. Eventually the string would break, and I'm sure it'd pass through the gulls. Yeah. It wouldn't harm them, but that was one of the forms of amusement. And we had one crazy lieutenant, an exec officer on our patrol craft. And as soon as he saw anything in the water, sharks especially, he'd go in and get an M1 and come out and start shooting at them. Yeah. He was nuts. I mean, it wasn't supposed to be allowed, I'm sure, but he would do it. And
did he retrieve it, or he would just let
no,
it
I think we never saw him hit anything.
Yeah.
I think he was a bad shot. But we saw these loggerhead turtles, these green sea turtles. They were huge. They were almost like the top of a car out there, the hood of a car. Yeah. So huge. And we saw, and lots of times dolphins would swim right in front of our bow. They would kind of just flick their tails on the bow. It was fun to watch them. Yeah. And then often they'd break. And we saw quite a few whales when we were coming up here to the New England coast, especially. Yeah, we saw a lot of whales. And every now and then when they would surface and blow, man, their breath smelled. I don't know if you...
Really? I've never been...
Because whatever they ate was terrible. They just didn't get digested in their stomach, and you could tell. But the plume of water also contained some real bad breath, let me tell you.
Now, besides the entertainers you saw when you were stationed in the hospital, did you guys see any other entertainers?
I can't think of any. No. Occasionally, civilians would come through the hospital when I was there, and they'd either pass out pens and paper or little pads and little gimmicks for the GIs. Yeah. But for the most part, we had singing groups that would come in, which was very entertaining. The choral groups from local churches sometimes would come in. And once in a great while, when we got to New London and we're going to be in port for a little while, some of the people would come in and come on aboard ship. Again, singing groups, so we'd have a couple of magicians and things like that.
Right.
But it was not very often. However, I think they're just entertaining us, which was great.
Yeah. Now, did they show a lot of movies aboard the ship?
Yes, every night we'd see movies.
Yeah.
And one night in particular on the repair ship, I remember it was a clear night, and I think we were watching Peter Pan, and we saw a display like you wouldn't believe. A few meteorites came down to the sky, and our attention, we happened to be looking in the right direction. The screen was back aft, and we were looking at that, and all of a sudden we saw these meteorites come in, and they lit up the sky.
Yeah. And
that was during a warmer month too. I think it was towards a late fall, probably September. But that was an entertainment enough by itself. But yes, they had movies then. They used to have the latest movies, and one of the things that we got sick of was George Raft and he played a gangster. I don't know what it was. And the guys would say, "Hey, what's playing tonight?" And they'd say, "George Raft," and I'll get laid. Will you? They didn't like that. That was kind of one of the things that guys would say. George Raft is playing tonight. No one would have show up because they had seen it about 4 times.
Right. So it just kind of got old quick.
It got to be old stuff. But yeah, we had good movies, I will say. They would. They tried to show them in the best weather, even on cloudy weather. We'd see movies on the bed.
Well, they would project it on the deck outside.
Yeah, they had a screen out back aft.
And they just had chairs.
Well, you could set it wherever you could.
Yeah.
Once in a while, we didn't have really chairs. Everything we had was bolted down pretty well in the mess hall. And but if you're lucky, you found a crate to sit on, or you sit on deck. Mostly, that's what it was. And lots of times on hot weather, we would sleep out on deck, and in the morning, we would go up and down the deck, and these little flying fish would fly and land on the deck, and we have to put. Of course, they were dead by that time, and they pick them up and toss them back overboard.
Now, what did you do when you were on leave?
On leave, well, let's see. I'd come home. I kept my car at Newport. I'm sorry, not Newport. In New London. I kept my car down there, and I would drive home. And there were two fellows. One lived in Worcester, Mass, and one lived in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. And they would ride with me part way, and they'd bum a ride.
Yeah.
But I think probably one time. When I was on this repair ship, I was still on that down in Norfolk, when my dad passed away. Our ship happened to be coming into New York City. It was docking there, and I got a leave to go for my dad's funeral, and I took a cab. I wanted to get out to the Wilbercross Parkway so I could come back, and I told this cabbie that I was on he asked where I was going. I said, well, back home. My dad passed away. I'm on leave. You know, he took me out to Wilbercross Parkway where I could bum a ride home and didn't charge me a thing.
Really?
That was the greatest thing. Yeah, cab drivers in New York, some of them are bad, but most of them are pretty helpful. I will say, very courteous. And so I did bum a ride all the way home. And after the funeral, of course, my car at this time was down in Norfolk, Virginia. And so I had to bum a ride back there. Well, I got down as far as Delaware, and I was picked up by a fellow that had a load of chickens, a trailer truck with a load of, they were butchered in cold storage.
Yeah.
And as we were going, he said that I'm going to stop and see my girlfriend. And he dropped me off, and I'll tell you, the night couldn't have been any darker. I said, man, oh man, this guy. So I started bumming a ride there, and a car stopped by, and there were two black fellows in the front. And I said, well, I've heard a sail is being rolled, and I've got to take a chance. I have to get back to my base.
Yeah.
And so these two, I got in the back seat, and then there was another black fellow in the back seat, and they were the friendliest guys, they were nicest guys. They dropped me off right at the ferry down in, I think it was the ferry that went across from Norfolk to I think it's Kip to Peak, I'm not sure. But it's a ferry that goes, at that time they didn't have the bridge. And so they dropped me right at the ferry, brought me right up to the landing. And I couldn't thank them enough. They were the nicest guys. And you know, the stereotype of black fellows, I have to say that I had a lot of black friends, and they're the nicest guys. So even in the service, I had a fellow by the name of Anderson that was right nearby. And he and I and this other Mormon used to hang around together.
Yeah.
But that was a scary thing, because when I was bumming a ride, it was black as the inside of a cow's belly. It was dark.
Yeah.
And I was a little leery, but I got back okay. I had to be back by a roll call, which is at 6:30, I think it was. But I got back okay.
That's good. All right, that was friendly of them. Now, you said he did a little traveling, you know, down in Virginia and stuff and whatnot. Did you travel anywhere else while you were in the service?
No, not really. When I was in Norfolk, as I say, I used to go out to a local airfield and continue getting the hours that I needed for my private pilot's license. And in fact, this fellow that I met there, old Jake was his name, and he was a, you know, one of these flying by the seat of your pants pilot.
Yeah.
And he taught me a lot of crazy things. In fact, one of the maneuvers he taught me was to, when I flew into a short field, to slip in. In other words, you reverse your controls in your aircraft, and you come down sideways. Well, I had taken one of my sailor buddies up for a flight, and it was okay, but then when I cut the engine back to drop down to get to the speed, the altitude to land at the field, I thought he was going to have a stroke. He started grabbing things. I said, relax, we're just losing altitude. And but this old Jake had taught me how to do this. He was an old salt, I will say.
Yeah.
The fellow that initially taught me to fly in Milwaukee in the airport was an Air Force pilot.
Okay.
And
he was in World War II?
He was in World War II, yeah.
Do you know what plane he flew?
Yeah, he used to in fact, he flew a P-38, one of my favorites.
Nice.
But I think my greatest favorite was a P-51 Mustang. And that was a romance for me. I just wanted to learn how to fly one of those, but I never got a chance to. I did fly with a serviceman in a PT-19 that he had at the field out there, and he let me handle the controls. But it's a heavy airplane compared to the Piper Cub.
Was it hard to handle?
Well, you had to make it behave. You had to keep power on because it didn't glide like the Piper Cubs. Right. Piper Cubs have a glide angle of about probably 18 to 1. It'll go 18 miles and then drop 1 mile. Wow. Whereas the PT-19 had a glide angle almost of a rock.
As soon as you let off, you dropped.
Yeah, it dropped, yeah.
Now, were you able to eventually get your pilot's license?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I got a pilot's license up here in Massachusetts. I ended up going to an airfield, and I took it was a 2-hour exam and a flight exam, and I passed them both.
Wow.
Yeah.
And they honored all your hours?
Yes, they did.
That's great.
And then I started getting hours. I owned a plane for about 4 years with 2 other fellows, and I did a lot of flying. In fact, when we first got it, every 3rd week I would fly because it was my turn.
Yeah.
And for the first year, every 3rd week I was down at the airfield. But then the 2nd year kind of let off a little, and I used to take my 3 kids with me. Then my son was the only one that liked to go. So I used to do a lot of flying each 3rd weekend. Then it got to be old stuff. I took my daughters up every time I went. It was an Aranca, it's a little Aranca Chief, I think it was. And it would hold 2 passengers, but my kids were small, so they all squeezed in the front seat with me. I used to take them local flights, and then pretty soon, the 2nd year, I didn't do so much flying because you got to now you had to devote your time to your family and your home. And about 4 years after, I sold the plane. But one of the most interesting things that we had, my partner and I had taken off at the field down near Haddam, and we used to fly across the Connecticut River. Well, we probably had an altitude of 1,500 feet when the engine completely stopped on us. And so all I did, I was in the left seat, I was the pilot, so I made a slow turn, headed back to the field, and finally glided into the field. We had enough altitude, because at the end I stopped. We were lucky. Yeah. And that happened to my partner some year later. I think a valve locked up or something, and the engine just quit, and he was fortunate enough to have enough altitude over the river that he landed in one of the, I think it's a state park right across the river from.
Oh yeah?
Yeah. He was lucky.
Set it right down.
No damage to the plane. No,
wow.
Set it right down. Lucky.
Now, do you recall any particularly humorous or unusual events while in the military, or in the Navy rather?
Well, as I say, some of the things that we amused ourselves with, throwing pieces of beef over the fantail and watching the gulls fight over it, watching the porpoise, and then of course observing the turtles out to sea sometimes. And you know, the water out to sea is the most beautiful blue water. If you've ever done any around the shores, it tends to be gray because it has silt in it, but out in the deep ocean, it's the most beautiful blue. And one time, I do remember a storm coming. We could see in the distance the whole sky was full of clouds at a distance, and then you could see the rain coming down. You could actually see it. And as it approached us, it swept over us, and it was probably for 5 minutes. It just poured, and then it left us. Or we went through it, I guess, or it went over us. It was fascinating. But yeah, I will say that the military did take care of me pretty well. I had, at that time, I found I couldn't see very well, and I had an eye test, and they provided me with eyeglasses. Of course, they were the ugliest things you could ever think. But other than laying on my back during New Year's Eve with the measles when I first went in boot camp, that wasn't too amusing. But I will say the doctors and nurses did what they could. They provided a lot for us. Service people look out for each other, I will say.
Absolutely. Now, I remember you saying a prank where you would tie the beef or whatever to the end and
Yeah.
watch the seagulls. Were there any other pranks that you would pull on or others
Oh,
pull on you?
well, yeah. When I was on this repair ship, it was an old ship, and when you went to the latrine, it didn't have individual stalls to sit at. What it had was a long trough, probably about 15, 20 feet long, and on the trough were a series of seats where you could sit. It wasn't very private. It's like the old Roman baths, if you've heard of them. And lots of times you go in there in the morning and some of these old salts will be sitting there reading the paper, and they wouldn't move, and you'd be standing around waiting for someone to move. Well, the trick was to get a bunch of newspapers or whatever it was and go up to the front where the water was coming through, because this trough always had running water through it. Yeah, and what you would do is you'd light this piece of paper on fire and drop it in the water, and as it passed under these guys, you'd see them whoop, 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 they'd all get, because the heat would prompt them to get out. And they'd leave the spot. But that was one of the things that we used to amuse ourselves with. And another one was when we took a shower on the repair ship. It was a small cabin, like you went in, and there were shower jets around the periphery, and it would probably 3 or 4 jets on each wall, each bulkhead. Community showers, they had probably 4 or 5 jets on each bulkhead. And you walked in and you picked one of the showers, and what you did is take a shower. But if there happened to be a guy in there that you didn't particularly care for, as you were leaving, you'd shut off his hot water. And as you walked out through you could hear me yelling, "Who the hell shut that off?" That was one of our forms of amusement, to torture each other. But it was easy enough to do. But some of these old salts were funny. I remember one sailor came in, I don't know how long he'd been for, and they refer to these propellers on a ship as screws, big 3-bladed props. Well, this guy came in and he had one on each ham, one on his rear end, and one each end. He said, I'm twin-engined. But some guy says some pretty elaborate tattoos on them. I never did get one. I'm kind of sorry I didn't, but hey, those things happen.
Yeah. Now, what did you think of officers or fellow soldiers?
The officers on the repair ship were pretty good, especially this one officer of mine, Warrant Officer Kiplinger. He was one hell of a nice guy, even-tempered, and if anyone had a problem, he would try to solve it. He was the one that, when he learned that my dad had passed away, put in for a swap for me. A swap means if you can find some sailor on a ship somewhere that wants to come on your ship or in your location, they'll swap.
So they covered your duty for your time spent.
And so you packed your sea bag and away you went. You went back to, you took his ship and he took your place on your ship. But the officers on the patrol craft, for the most part, were good. We had a captain, an exec, and an engineering officer, and a commissary officer, and I don't know what the other one, quartermaster, I think, he took care of it. But the commissary officer was the one that we used to play more tricks on, stealing his pies and stuff like that, and making off with tuna fish and ham, a case of ham. That nearly caused a riot when we made off with a case of ham, canned hams, because he couldn't account for it. And we fortunately could hide it in our compartment. They did search the ship, and we hid it very well. They couldn't find it.
That's right. Now, did you ever keep a personal diary when you were over there?
No, I never did. Now, I think that I enjoyed the guys, and I didn't find a lot of fault with the Navy, I will say.
Now, moving on. Do you recall the day your service ended?
Yes, I was in New London, and I was mustered out with a blanket, and I don't know what it was, and I reported to the sub-base, which was actually across the street, across the river, the Thames River. We were stationed at what was called the Sound Lab. It was across the river from the electric boat, and electric boat is where the Navy had its submarines, and where they were docked. By the way, during the time I was in the service, a buddy of mine was on a Corsair, or submarine, and he got the okay for me to go on a day on the sub.
Okay.
And that was kind of enjoyable. I used to think that the sub would be very claustrophobic, but it wasn't. It was just like being below decks in my patrol craft, just like that. A little more cramped, probably. But when they sounded GQ, they told me what to do. Just get out of the way. And because wherever I was at GQ, for instance, forward engine room, torpedo room, wherever it happened to be, and it sounded, because they ran maneuvers while we were out that day. And they would shut the watertight doors, because they had to have watertight integrity, and then you'd feel the deck, the engines would stop, and you'd feel, now you hear the hum of the electric engines, and of course the deck would start to slant because you were going down. And they'd probably stay down for an hour or half an hour, then come back up again. But that was kind of an exciting thing. I enjoyed that. I don't know if I'd want to be a submariner, but it was a fun day.
How was the crew? Were they friendly?
Oh, they're very friendly. Yeah. They tried to recruit me to join the submarine service, but by that time I only had a couple of months to go. I said, nah, thanks, guys.
Now, what did you do in the days and the weeks afterward?
After I got out?
Yeah.
Well, I got married, and we bought a 26-foot trailer and moved to Plainville, Connecticut, where we had 3 kids, and we lived in the trailer for 4 years. At that time, I was going to the University of Hartford to college. I went 11 years to get my degree in engineering. We sold the trailer after about 5 years, bought a home in Newington, and I did some various jobs, engineering jobs, Standard Knapp in Portland, and then New England Machine Tool Company in Berlin, and then I went to FAFTA. But when I traveled for 3 years for New England Machine, one evening I said, I've got a family back home, what am I doing traveling? I was out in Chicago. So I immediately came home, and I went to a headhunter, got a job with FAFTA Bearing, where I worked and retired from in 1989. During that time, I was a volunteer fireman for Newington for 25 years. I was also appointed a fire marshal for the state of Connecticut. My territory was Newington. I was the fire marshal for 14 years. And then we built a home here in Avon in 1982, moved in here, and I lost my wife 10 years ago in 2001. And then I joined the fire police here in Avon. Okay. The fire police, so their job is to watch out for the welfare of the firemen during a call. In other words, if their engines are parked on the street, we protect the perimeter so that cars won't hit the firemen and make it safe for them to walk around. And then after fire is over, we kind of patrol the house to make sure if the homeowner's not there until they do come home, so that nobody will come in and go through the house. Usually it's unoccupied at that time. And so now I'm enjoying retirement.
I said you went back to school. What was that like?
Well, it's kind of tough.
Yeah, you did night classes?
Yeah, night class. I did take some USAFE courses when I was in the service, the United States Armed Forces Institute. And I got quite a bit of math courses that I needed. And but getting back to college was kind of tough, because going out at nights, I started for 4 years going 3 nights a week, and I had a heavy load. Yeah. Then I cut it back to 2 nights a week, because for every hour you spend in college in evening school, you're supposed to spend 2 hours at home studying. Yeah. And that was hard to do with 3 kids. I gave up a lot with my...
I give you a lot of credit for that. It's not easy.
No.
Definitely not easy. Now, was your education supported by the GI Bill?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I was getting half of the monthly pay, and that paid for my my education. At that time, Hillier College, which now is University of Hartford, I think I paid something like $12 a credit hour.
Wow.
And that was cheap at that time. Yes. Now it's a heck of a lot. But by getting I think it was like $86 a month, I was able to buy my time in college.
Great. Now, did you make any close friendships while in the service?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I have a friend that's in New York State. I haven't talked with him I used to communicate with him quite a bit. His name was Ralph, first name, and I cannot recall. But as a matter of fact, at that time, when my dad passed away, I had a 49 Ford that I sold to him, and I took off my dad's car, which was a 51 Pontiac, and I bought it from my mother. But he was one friend, and then another friend of the Indian. Once in a while, I would send a card to him, and he'd return it down in Oklahoma. Yeah, but I lost track with him. And there's a doctor friend of mine who I used to meet once in a while during Christmas, but this has been 3 or 4 years since he got I guess he got divorced and kind of left his family and kind of dropped out of the wayside.
Now, did you join any veterans organizations?
Well, I was asked to join the Legion. I declined on that, but then I tried to join the VFW, Veterans of Foreign Wars, here in Avon. But I didn't have the right medals, I was told. In other words, I was never in a zone where there was any military action. Right. I guess they didn't consider the Korean War when patrolling the Atlantic dangerous enough, because even though we had Russian subs that we would intercept, and it was during that time, I had 13 months and better on the ocean, but that was at that time was not considered as any hazardous duty, and I agree, it wasn't hazardous. However, I think there's a move afoot, I hope it passes, that they will accept the GIs in that category. And I know that 3 or 4, the same instance, my buddy who I went in the service with was trying to get in the VFW up in Westboro, Massachusetts, but he couldn't get in either, because I talk with him every once in a while.
Now, you said that as a career you worked in a couple of different areas. Can you talk a little bit more about your career after the war?
Sure. I worked as a designer at Standard Nap in Portland. We designed packaging machinery, counting beer cans, putting them in cases, and labeling and so on. I worked there for 2 or 3 years, and then I think in 90, somewhere around 76, I believe it was, we had hard times, and they were laying off people, and I was about ready to be laid off. Mm-hmm. So I got a job I went to see a headhunter and got a job at New England Machine and Tool Company, where I worked.
That's where you retired from?
No, that's where I stayed for about 3 or 4 years.
Okay.
But that's where I quit, because when I was out on the road too much. And that was great, because I used to fly to Europe. I've been to Germany, Italy, and France. I've been to England and Canada, in a lot of places in the country, but the traveling got to be too much. My kids were home, my wife was taking care of the kids by themselves, and growing up without a father, I didn't think that was right. That's when I went to work for a Fafner Burning Company. Okay. And I stayed with them. I had a nice job with them as an chief engineer of the manufacturing development group. And I left Fafner Burning, and I retired when I was working as a special projects engineer after about 14 years as a manager, and I had enough. I asked my vice president, I was like a babysitter. I had 8 engineers, something like 7 or 8 technicians, and 10 tool makers, or machinists, if you call. Right. And I had the union on one side, and these guys were gung-ho on the other side. The technicians wanted to be an engineer's job, get an engineer's pay. Right. The engineers wanted my job. And so it was kind of a battle. I would have a few hassles with the unions, but after about a number of years, I decided I didn't want that anymore. My vice president said, okay. He made me a special project engineer, and I worked directly for him. And after about a year, I said, I'm going to be 59 and a half. How about it? Let me retire. Because they had given, years before, a golden handshake to quite a few guys. Right. And he said, no, we can't do that. Well, so one day he said, I can give you a silver handshake, which means they'll pay my pay up for a year until Social Security kicks in. I said, I'll take it. I took it, and I never looked back. But I enjoyed working for him. He was a good guy to work for.
That's great. Now, did your military experience influence your thinking about the military or war in general?
Well, I'm kind of sorry I didn't stay in. I wish I was in the reserves, and I kind of wish I had stayed in the reserves. And in fact, about 4 years ago, with this war going on overseas, Iraq and Iran and so on, I called an...
We were talking about, before the phone rang, did your military experience influence your thinking about war or about military in general?
Yes, it did. As a matter of fact, about 4 years ago, I tried to join the National Guard. I thought that, I'm okay. So at that time, I was about 78 years old. I can still drive a truck, or I can do some work with a computer or so on.
Yeah.
And they said, no, they can't use me. I said, come on. I'd be eager to get back in the service. My wife had passed away, and I wanted something to do. But yes, I really wish that I had stayed in the reserves. I think I could have worked myself up to a pretty good rate or whatever. And I think, and giving back to the country, that was the main thing, that I felt everyone in this country owes something to their country.
Absolutely. Now, if you're in or you're part of associated with the VFW and so on, and possibly other organizations. Now, what kind of activities does your poster association have?
Well, we have the Poppy Drive, of course. That's a very popular one, and I participated in that every time they've had it, even though I count myself a counterfeit member because I'm not an actual member.
Right.
But Bill Newman, who is the commander, said, stay in, we want you to, you're very helpful to us, because I contribute. And they meet they meet socially Thursday mornings over at the Friendlies over here in Avon.
Okay.
They all get there about 9:30, and so we go and listen to the latest, and then they have a meeting on Wednesday evenings once a month, and so I'm invited to go to those. It's at the Italian Club, and the gals serve a great meal.
Yeah.
As far as other things, I'm sure they do other things. They sponsor a few people I know, and they help anyone who needs help. We'll let that go. Anyone that needs help, I know they're very generous in looking after each other. And like the wounded warriors that are coming back, I know they feel strongly about helping them.
Right.
And I do too, because these guys coming back, sometimes they have a physical problem, sometimes they have a traumatic effect, and they need help. When you put these guys on the line like that, and they don't know if they're coming back, and to lose a limb, I feel for these guys. I've never been in that position, but I can well imagine how they must feel. I've been in scary positions myself, but nothing like some of them have suffered, I'm sure.
Right, absolutely. Now, have you attended any reunions?
No, I haven't. But the ship that I was on, the Pisser, PCER, we used to call it a Pisser, 850, they had reunions. I think they had one, but it was in Long Beach, California. And at that time, I was going to school, and I couldn't afford to go out there.
Yeah.
But I'm sure if they did have, I would. But I did go online and found that my repair ship was sold, I think sold for scrap.
Huh.
And the patrol craft that I was on was sold to Iran years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, you can get online and find out where these ships go.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Now, how did your service and experiences affect your life?
Well, I think it taught me discipline, and it taught me teamwork, to help other guys. There was one fellow that was in boot camp that he had mental problems, I swear. But he was a good kid, and we all kind of helped him, especially when we came to getting ready for inspection. We helped him make sure his clothes were neatly packed in his locker, that he had no food, because he used to bring food home. He's not the one that had the bologna in his locker, but made sure his shoes were shined, and so that he would pass. And he went on okay. I guess he was then assigned to a ship, but we felt sorry for him.
Yeah.
Because he was just a good kid, and
It was simple.
he was he needed help.
Well, it's good that you guys helped him out.
We did. I was proud of the guys that did help them, because we did, and I was kind of proud of the work that I did with these fellas who were for a couple of weeks that I was teaching to read and write and how to spell. To me that was a gratifying experience.
Absolutely, I imagine that'd be rewarding. Now, is there anything else you'd like to add that we haven't covered in the interview?
No, I can't think of anything offhand. I think my mouth is dry. I think I've talked enough. But I do say that even though, would I go back in the service again? Yeah, I think I would. It was a good experience. Taught me discipline and taught me how to take care of myself, because when I was home, of course, my mother used to do my wash for me and things like that, make the meals. And in the service, you had to fend for yourself. You had to take care of yourself, and you had to do it with a reasonable amount of care, because the officers over you, if they saw you were slovenly or not paying attention or you whatever, they'd come down on you, give you with the wrath of God, so to speak.
Well, I want to thank you for your time today for the interview, and I also want to thank you for your service for the country. I really appreciate it, and others will get to hear as well, and it'll be archived.
Thank you, John. I appreciate the interview.
You're welcome.
It's nice meeting you too.
Likewise.